Hello and welcome to episode 229 of the Paint or the Minis Paint Ramble podcast. We put the show together so you can have something to listen to if you choose to listen to it while sitting at your hobby desk, painting your miniatures of any genre, scale or game, or just listening to it wherever you want. I'd be interested to know what you're listening to. Some people are messaging every so often talking about when they listen or where they listen to it. So if you're interested and you think you might listen to it in a strange place, one place that we might not necessarily anticipate, then make sure you contact us, reach out, and you can tell us where you listen. Our aim is to have a relaxed and genuine conversation with people who are involved in a hobby at any level, from top to bottom, because we've all got our own stories. We believe that these genuine and organically occurring chats offer a different and possibly deeper insight into the guests. The sort of conversation that you might have whilst sharing a cup of tea with them, sharing a pint of mild with them, or sharing a caramel frappuccino with an extra pump of vanilla syrup and soy milk and not full-fat moo milk. Maybe. I don't know. What do you drink? What do you drink while you're listening to the show? There you go. This is interaction. Where do you listen to the show? And what do you drink when you're listening to the show? That'll be all. That's interesting insight. That's deep. So I hope that you enjoy the show. I hope that you enjoy Paint All Me's being back weekly. It's back weekly again. I'm tentatively a little bit like sidling out onto lake ice. That's how I would probably anticipate how we are right now, is I'm kind of slowly, steadily sliding onto the lake ice. Someone's reassured me that the lake ice is deep enough and thick enough for me to skate on. I don't necessarily believe them, so I'm slowly, tentatively sliding out onto the lake to see. But we should be back weekly. We should be back weekly for the foreseeable future. So anyway, that's enough of me whittling on about random stuff before. We hope that you are sitting at your hobby desk. We hope that you are painting your models, and we hope that when you listen to the chat that you enjoy the content. If you do enjoy the content, please make sure that you reach out, paintalltheminis@gmail.com by email. You can come and sniff around the Discord server. There's a link in the description and it doesn't expire. You can come and hang out on the Facebook group, or you can send a carrier pigeon or a smoke signal or some sort of telepathic message to me that I will receive. It's always really good to know that you guys are listening, because that's who we do it for. We do it for you. We do it for you to hang out with you. We do it so we can interact with you. We do it for the kids. Anyway, in this episode, I speak to Mr. Rich Carlisle, now of Footsore Miniatures. In this episode, Rich completes his hat trick. A hat trick is 3 goals in a game. So if you've scored a hat trick in any sport that you participated in your life, then congratulations. This is Rich's hat trick. It's the 3rd time he's been on the show. If you're interested in hearing his full story, you can check out episode 34. Episode 34, so nearly 200 episodes ago was the first time that Rich came onto the show. You can also check out episode 163-ish. It's kind of like between episode 163 and episode 164. That was about the time we were doing the Paint All the Minis online convention. Rich was at Sarissa Precision at the time, and he did some awesome stuff for the PatmaCon 2020 during the COVID times when I was working out of a shed in West London, which was fantastic. So if you're interested in Rich's story, you can check out episode 34 and also between episode 163 and 164. Anyway, I've lost my point on the script. I do have a script, believe it or not. It doesn't seem like I do. I have a bunch of notes that I work from, but I've lost my space. Where am I? There you go. Rich has always been a huge supporter of ours, and I don't think it's because of Paint All the Minis. I just think that he is a really, really great guy, and it's just down to his nature of wanting to support and assist people on their hobby journey, and also wanting to be a positive force for good in the hobby. I can't thank Rich enough for his chipper demeanour, his can-do attitude, and his open-mindedness whenever I've interacted with him. Whenever I've wanted to talk to him, whenever I've wanted to ask a question, or whenever I've had a request for anything, he's always been a genuine, high-quality, honest and open guy, and I can't thank him enough for that, both for myself, but also all the other people that he's interacted with. So thanks, Rich. You're an amazing guy, and long may that continue. In the show, we talk about him and his background a little bit, what he's learned from his own professional journey whilst working for some stellar names in the hobby world. And we also talk about his new role at Footsore Miniatures and their catalogue of games. Footsore husbands a number of miniature lines and games. We mentioned them during the show, so I'm not going to mention them here. But if you haven't heard of Footsore Miniatures, it's definitely worth swinging across to their website because they've got a lot of interesting minis and games, especially the Baron's War, which is pretty good. That's always something that has tickled my fancy from across the room, elude me whilst waving a hanky from across the room, and I've yet to delve in, so I might do that over the next few years, months, I don't know. But if you haven't checked out Footsore, make sure that you do, because they are awesome and they've got awesome people like Rich working for them. But anyway, that is enough of the pre-ramble, a particularly rambly pre-ramble right there. Apologies for that if you don't like that sort of thing, and awesome if you do like that sort of thing. But that is enough of the pre-ramble. Let's go.
Paint all the minis. Paint all the minis that you can. And when you paint your minis, listen to that podcast with Dan Adams, that is.
What's happening? We have sort of a problem here. You apparently didn't put primer on your latest batch of models you bought. Yeah. See, we're putting primer on all the models now before we paint them. Did you see the memo about this? Yeah, if you could just go ahead and make sure you do that from now on, that would be great. And I'll go ahead and make sure you get another copy of that memo. Okay? Yeah.
So, hey, I am here with Mr. Richard Carlisle. How's it going, mate?
Hello, Dan. Perfectly well. Fine and dandy here, sir.
So, as you know, your name, and everyone knows your name because I've introduced you, but people that maybe haven't listened to those episodes previously, just give us a little bit of a snapshot of your kind of career background, because as we've known each other, you've had a number of high profile and interesting roles. So go right the way back to the start. And what was your first role within the hobby?
Right back to the start? No, yeah. I won't go that far. I went to school going back a while. So I've worked for Games Workshop back in the 90s. I left Workshop to go to open my own shop in New Zealand in 2000. So I opened a shop called Historic Games in Auckland, Ellerslie. Was there for in New Zealand there for about 7 years all up, during which time I ended up at Battlefront Miniatures. Battlefront Miniatures was a good adventure. We got that up and running and brought out Flames of War. Probably seen the odd picture in there of me in some of the books. I just had a hand in that with me being in the factory most of the time there. From Battlefront, they shifted to Malaysia in 2007, and that's when I left and came back to the UK. Departed gaming for a while, became a driving instructor for a bit. Then I ended up in 2015 at Warlord Games.
That's
back into the industry.
Yeah, that's where I first bumped into you at Warlord Games.
Indeed,
and so, yeah. What did you do there? And just give us a brief snapshot, because people can go back and listen to previous episodes to get the details of this. But a brief snapshot, what were you doing there?
Absolutely. Well, I'd got the opportunity to pop into Warlord and did a bit of casting, did a bit of with metal, helped out here and there around the factory, but all ended up in the web team doing a lot of the sort of social media and all the campaigns that we did for Bolt Action, that type of stuff.
That's awesome. And then from there you bounced across to...
Yeah. Well, I left there literally just before COVID hit. But I was lucky enough to already have something lined up with Sarissa. Steve had invited us knew that I was leaving, and invited us to come and have a chat. So where I thought I might get a few months to go and travel back to New Zealand and see some friends who were getting married and do a bit of travelling with the family, ended up working with Sarissa straight away.
Nice.
We got back from New Zealand just a short trip and cracked on that through COVID with Sarissa, which was a weird time because
sure.
just beforehand we'd spent a bit of time planning how we were going to cope, shutting the business, coping with staff being furloughed, that type of thing. And I was the only one that wasn't really going to be furloughed because I was going to do the social media, promote Sarissa whilst everybody was shut, to keep everybody's mind on us, so to speak.
For sure,
Yeah, didn't turn out that way. As soon as everybody's in lockdown, they all wanted real hobby time, discovered real hobby time, wanted new things to do, and it was absolutely manic for 3-4 months in a row, where the factory guys, all bar one, came back to work in their bubbles, as it was at the time, and I was working at my shed, which is when we talked again, I think. I'm sure we talked then, because we did some Tuesday night live videos at Sarissa.
I remember.
Yeah, we got the Gary did some cool training videos, like how to paint the MDF and using different techniques for the show over the couple of days that we were on that for Pat McCon. And we did all sorts of little extras on Discord for that. And we just got stuck into designing. Steve and the crew just dug in and got making stuff for 3-4 months in a row. It was like Christmas for 3 months. Absolutely manic in the factory, trying to work around the 2-meter spacing and all that type of stuff. But it settled down, luckily. And we got back into the daily routines, and lots of new stuff came out over those years. That was there, and I kind of got to the point where everything was going along happily, hunky-dory. We were supporting, at Sarissa, we were supporting War Games Atlantic, growing their plastics. It worked out quite nicely there because we could support Hudson and the guys with packing in the UK. So we had enough space to store the plastics as raw material, pack them all in new boxes, and we worked on being the hub for the UK and Europe. And that's where that sort of relationship with War Games Atlantic and Sarissa grew, to the point now where they're looking after Australasia as well, I believe. So
there you go. And let's put a pin in the background. Let's put a pin there, because there's a lot of road covered there, mate. That's really interesting, and I know that you're in a different role at the moment. But let's kind of let's look back at kind of just pre-Sarissa, and then we'll dig around a little bit more Sarissa, and then we'll kind of come to modern day.
Keep the surprise where I'm at now.
It's under wraps. So you mentioned there's Warlord, right? There is
Warlord,
Battlefront. There's Games Workshop. There's 3
Battlefront Miniatures before
really big organizations there. So kind of go through each one in turn, if you wouldn't mind, and tell us like what your favorite part of working with them was, and maybe like what your favorite thing was working with those individual companies that are very different but very great in their own individual ways. Then also maybe one thing that you learnt, or one thing that you took away from working with them.
Well, you're talking big organisations. I think people often perceive them as big.
Yes.
But they're not. A big organisation's Games Workshop. In Games Workshop, I started as a staff member in a shop. I think the shop was number 50 odd at the time in the world. by the time I left, there were over 200 and something shops around the world, and I was one of the senior managers, if you like, at that point, doing training of other managers. So when I moved to New Zealand and started working with Battlefront, it was, I think, 3-4 of us.
Mm-hmm.
So other than the owner, Pete Sminovich, there were in the factory about 4 of us.
Mm-hmm.
And that grew, I think, to a management team in the factory of 3 with about 4 or 5 staff.
Yep.
And the design team, if you like, with Phil and Dion and the other crew was about 3 or 4 as well. So it wasn't really that huge. And I guess if I was to say what I learned at Battlefront, it was the if you like, the management within a factory environment, because I've come from a shop management perspective, and then moving into the coordination of miniature design and turning that design into a reality was what I got to grips with in Battlefront. So taking it from a sculpt, a sketchbook or an idea in Phil's head or Pete's head about what he wanted into a sculpt with Evan, the sculptor, through to an actual finished product through the factory, through the different phases, whether it be a resin tank going into resin molds or metal tracks or metal troops, that type of thing. And we even, whilst we were there, started looking at plastics. So I was there at the very, very early days of having a look at how to make a plastic tank. And that was fun. The company we went to first for Battlefront and their plastics was a widget company, literally around the corner from the factory. They just made little plastic widgets that kept the electric fence wire from touching anything.
Right.
Little discs, that's all they made.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Thousands, billions of them. But they were so intrigued, and they had such a good factory layout and CNC machines that they really went to town and got to grips with making a little Sherman.
That's pretty cool.
So that was Battlefront. Yeah.
So you've talked about... Warlord. Yeah, no. So before we get onto that, so Games Workshop was more the people management and store management, right? And then you moved into Battlefront, and that was more of production and project management. Would you say?
Yes. Yeah, product management, moving things through, but also running the factory, forecasting, that type of stuff.
And then over to Warlord, where you started getting involved in social media, right?
That's the one. Yeah.
So out of those 3, what have you preferred, generally speaking?
I think out of the 3, for me personally, I like the middle ground. I like to have an overview and connect people who are sculpting, getting the right sculpts into the production phase, getting the production out the door, organising that type of project, if you like. But face-to-face with people is always good fun.
Yeah.
Being in the shops was always that's still going out to events and saying hi to people, and being face to face is good fun.
That's what you like. That was what you'd say you like the most. That's cool. So as we go into Sarissa now, how did that differ, or how was that the same as previous roles you had?
It kind of used all my skills from a variety of those. I did talk to potential clients a lot, but then it was more nothing, no creative sort of side of things. That was left to others, but it was definitely on the website side of things, getting the social media, that type of thing ready, and organising the War Games Atlantic side, which came from the whole Battlefront, being able to organise the factory and forecast and that type of stuff. So being able to put some kind of forecasting system into place, and that allowed us to properly plan when to pack stuff, how much to pack, where to store it, how to store it, all the factory management side of things.
How different is
that? Was definitely how I left Sarissa.
Yeah, how different was with the factory environments, because Sarissa Precision is obviously MDF terrain centered. Warlord has got plastics, resins, and metals. Battlefront, where like resins and metals moving into plastic. So, are there similarities between all those three different factory settings, or are they very different?
They're definitely similarities. The differences come in the location of where you're at to a big degree, the approach that you have to take when you're in another country, if you like. New Zealand being so far from anywhere else, it's interesting how to coordinate everything coming in and where it's best to do it. Hence the thinking at the time, moving to Malaysia, looking at partners and offices in the UK and America, that type of thing. Because ultimately it's a long way to ship, it's a long way to move finished goods. And we brought that into practice in Sarissa, where finished goods were originally being sent from China or America, but often they'd arrive damaged.
Right.
So to cut back on costs, where finished goods take up 9 or 12 pallets worth of product, the raw materials only take up 4.
Right.
So raw material wise, we could have a shipment come in by aircraft rather than ship. So it would arrive quicker on less pallets. We could turn it around and have a finished product inside a few days, going out to customers literally within a couple of days instead of 6 months potentially at some times, when it was from either China or US via ship. So you take those things on board that you've learned doing something from a long way away like New Zealand, come back to the UK where you're more centralized. It makes it a lot easier to gather goods, and there's more flexibility when it comes to getting things printed, resources, that type of thing.
Would you call yourself, and would you be proud to be, a generalist, or would you say that you're not a generalist, you're actually a specialist?
I'm very generic in what I do.
But that's not a bad thing. I remember when someone first called me a generalist, and I was like, what? Because it seemed to be suggest, I always think of jack of all trades, and then the second thing people say is
you think of jack of all trades, master of none, don't you?
You do think of that, but that's not even necessarily a negative or derogatory thing. So it's like I really enjoy being a generalist.
Yeah, there's the jack of all trades type approach, but I think as a generalist, you've actually put a lot of time and effort into the aspects that you're actually interested in, which makes you even better at them than normal. So
I agree.
I
think
when it comes to my current job.
Well, let's just hold the current job. Let's leave that. That's the big unveil is going to come soon. So just a couple of minutes more on Sarissa. So, all that experience, all that hard-won experience, and all that trial and error in some cases, and the knowledge and the knowing and the experience, that's hard-won. Right. And some people think about, as you get older, you kind of, especially I'm knocking past 50, not 50, I'm knocking past 40 now. And it's kind of like people say, get on a bit. And it's like, well, yeah, I am. But I actually know a fair bit about a few things, and I can kind of bring that to bear. And that kind of seems like yourself, you worked within the industry for a long time. You had lots of different roles in lots of different settings, and there's a lot of experience there, mate. I bet it's hard to flummox you, and I bet it's hard to create a situation where you're not going to find an answer and thrive, right?
Well, thank you. I am over 50 now. Old and past it. I hope that's correct. I'd like to think so. I wouldn't blow my trumpet. There's experience there, 30 odd years now in the industry, and you do see a lot, but then there's always something new coming around the corner, and the things are changing quite rapidly at times. But I think the experience just helps you adapt. You can use that as a fallback, but ultimately you want to keep pushing forwards. So you're trying to learn new techniques or take new ideas and run with them a bit more, and look for new blood in the hobby, if you like, in the business, who can try change and change things up a bit. Sarissa, I helped get on board an apprentice, same as I did at Warlord. I got several apprentices on board there, and I truly believe those guys came in, or girls, came in and really made a big difference in both companies with their approach, because it was, I've got the way I want it done, because that's the way we think it should be done at this moment in time. However, these new guys coming on board, they might have a whole fresh approach. Like my last apprentice at Sarissa, she just come from a degree in film, couldn't get work within that industry, so was looking for something else, and gone into social media management as an apprentice, which is a bit mad. But a 25-year-old with a degree under her belt, wanting to be an apprentice, fantastic, great skills. What more could we ask from someone there? And film and photography I know about, but not well enough to make a living out of it in any kind of way. I can take photos of miniatures on a tabletop and hopefully make them look cool. If you look at any of the battle shots that we did in Sarissa's website, that they're mostly sort of envisaged by myself. And I hope that with the apprenticeship, she's been able to take on board some of the tips and tricks, and she'll just drive it forward now with new ideas. And I think that's what we should be looking for in the industry as well.
Is that mindset just a personal thing? Did you learn that from like a book or somebody else?
No, I think there's probably influences of various places over the years, I guess. Various management training and other things that you've been on. Games Workshop was a big influence originally. The management training was brilliant. Albeit that myself and a couple of the other managers wrote a lot of it to begin with. They took what we had and expanded on it and followed Marks and Spencer's sort of approach at the time, back in the 90s. And the training really gave us good groundwork. And I think that obviously has helped over the years. But I've done more training in various places. I was in the military as well, so that's obviously way back when. That has an influence. So all your experiences from cadets through to whatever you're doing now, it changes and creates your approach. And I think that, again, come back to being a generalist, helps me have a good spread of skills that I'm good at, which allow me to help and support, or rather understand and then help and support those that are doing those specific tasks. Yeah,
but you also come across as a compassionate, open-minded person too, and I think we've spoke and we've maintained a relationship for so long because you're just a very credible, nice, open-minded individual. I bet it's good fun working with you. I know. I remember when I came into Warlord Games, and sorry, you can give me a tenner later, mate. Well, I remember when I came into Warlord Games to visit, and it just felt really warm, and it just felt really nice, and it just felt like a really good place to be. And I reckon it's really, really fun working with you in an office, mate. I bet it's really fun working on projects with you.
Thank you. Yeah, that comes from Games Workshop.
Nice.
That's being in the shop environment. Customers, we've got to look after them, and they don't necessarily always come first. I would argue that one. However, the you should always have that openness and approach to any customer or anybody that you're working with, potential clients, friends. That if you're there to support and help them, then that benefits you in the long run as well. I think personally, whether it's in life or business. So
I get it. Market leaders, Games Workshop, you could argue a market leader. Battlefront, market leader with what it is that they do. Warlord, market leader with what they do. Sarissa, market leader with what they do. You've worked at some very credible organizations which are at the kind of sharp edge of the things that they do, right?
100%. Yeah, absolutely. I'd agree with that. Certainly from the market leader point of view, people might argue that, but I think innovation and some of the quality of the product, the quality of the service stand out in all of those. Although sometimes you got to wonder at Warlord. They get good quality of service, but that's probably because they have so many people getting sorted by Lorenzo, who's awesome in the customer service team, because they've made so many mistakes in the first place. But that is by and by they are serving a lot of people.
Yeah, for sure. That's cool, man. So now it's time. So you stepped away from Sarissa and you stepped into
Footsore Miniatures.
Nice. Just across the way from Warlord, right? Or is it still just across
it's
the
in
way?
the same town. We're in Nottingham. I'm about the same distance from Sarissa as I am from Warlord and Games Workshop. So there's a multitude of other little companies floating around that, Annie and the guys over at Warplock, a variety of them. So it's definitely the hub of the industry, it feels like, the lead belt.
Yeah, for sure. And that's awesome. Like, I remember, again, coming to visit and having so many companies so close together and realizing that there could be some guy just standing outside Warlord having a cigarette, and he can probably see 3 or 4 different places in the same kind of area. And then, within like 20 miles or 15 miles, there's lots of different places around. So it's awesome. And you mentioned before about how, maybe the perception is of a big organization. And when you say big, you might just mean big in the sense of that people around the world would recognize the badge or recognize the models. So
absolutely.
The visibility is big, but the actual operations quite often are quite small. So with Footsore, what sort of size are you talking about? How many people are full-time? How many people might potentially be part-time? How many people have got their fingers in the pie?
Oh, well, at Footsore, we've got 2 full-timers, if you exclude me, 3 with me. And we've got 2 part-time. And we want to obviously grow the business to a point where those guys come on full-time. We also have a director who is full-time working with us as well, Mark. And Andy Hobday was a director, so he's no longer part of the business, really. His focus is with his own companies like Hobday and Hicks, working with Paul Hicks and War Games Atlantic, that type of thing. So.
Yeah. And there's a number of different games that have been associated with Footsore over the years, and that's been really interesting, kind of seeing those games grow and develop. Test of Honor, Gangs of Rome, Mortal Gods, Baron's War, those are just a few of them. So was it a company, was it an organization, was it people that you already knew, so that when you were thinking potentially getting involved, was it a no-brainer? Was it an easy decision for you to go and get involved there?
It was fairly easy because it takes me back to some of the skills that I was probably more comfortable using or more experienced using, and that was the skills from Battlefront, where I was pulling together all the strings, if you like, for the factory and for the sculpting and all the other stuff. And Footsore Miniatures wanted a general manager to basically look at all the ins and outs and costings, which is easy enough to do because I've done that in shops and so forth, as well as run staff, again, something that I'm quite happy to do, in the factory environment, bit of organising, bit of forecasting, making sure the plans are in place for things to happen, and I guess part of my overall skills is making it happen. So they came to me. As it happens, I've known Mark on and off through for Footsore, because we've used Footsore at Sarissa to make the metal for Test of Honor for Graham Davey and his Grey for Now games. So it's all incestuous. Everybody knows each other. We all work for each other. So I've known Mark for a while, but Andy I've known for 30 odd years.
Yeah.
Back in the Games Workshop management days, I think he was at Oxford and then Oxford Street in London, and I was in Guildford, Watford, Guildford, before going to Holland, and then he ended up as my area manager whilst I was in Guildford and Holland. So yeah, we've known each other for quite a while. So when the opportunity came up, he mentioned it that they were actually looking at doing this open role, and I applied and had the interview, and Mark said yes, come on board. For his sins, they said yes, we want you.
That's awesome.
Yeah,
so how have you settled in? What sort of things have you enjoyed as you kind of got your feet under the table?
Well, it's literally been that I'm coming to the end of month 2. So as you'd expect, you don't go in and just bulldoze your way through the staff and
you don't.
Make
okay, let me scribble
yours.
this down, mate.
Yeah, I've never done that. I've gone in, I've watched, I've talked to the guys, I've had them pull out ideas, get them, coming together, and having your basic chats, understanding who they are, what they like, what they want to work on, what things don't work for them, what equipment works better, what doesn't. All these sort of things that you do to make life easier for someone to do their job more efficiently, potentially more quality based, and hopefully with the efficiency and quality you get some speed and volume, so that we keep our customer service high, customer quality high, which is quite easy with Footsore because we've got 2 of the best mold makers in the business for metal and for resin. I really highly rate their skills. From what I've seen around a variety of companies, they stand out way above any of the others that I've generally seen out there. Worldwide, from America, New Zealand, UK, Europe, they are good at their job. So those 2 guys are worth their weight in gold. The Daz, who runs our picking, packing, dispatching, I say run, he is picking, packing, dispatching. He is the one. The perception is we could be perceived, I suppose, with 3 core games, Mortar Gods, Gangs of Rome, and The Baron's War being the award-winning one. Those 3 games alone might make us seem quite large as a business, but literally there's just the 4 or 5 of us day to day in the business.
I like that though. Like I really like small settings that I've worked in professionally. I've worked in the same profession for many years now. The ones where you've got a little small team, ones where you've got a small organization or a very small group of people that work on things, I tend to find that those are the ones that I've liked the best. And so I reckon you get like significantly more done, and it's significantly more efficient than maybe some big organizations that maybe have got a lot of bloat maybe. And there's I forget the actual official study that was done, but they kind of did a few studies on tug of war teams that started with 7 people, and they found that the general kind of force that people were using with 7 people was like X, but then when they took 1 or 2 people away, the tug of war team actually did better because the people knew that they had less people, so they had to do more. And they actually found that when they put more people on, there wasn't a direct correlation between more people pulling and more force.
And that's why you see in the military squads of 4 to 8 in the elite teams, because they know that more than 4 is hard to manage. The 5th man's a loose wheel, a casualty waiting to happen type thing. So working in small teams is much easier to have that communication, have that efficiencies in place, and I'd agree totally with the bloat at the top, particularly with, in my opinion, Games Workshop and Warlord. But when you get down to Sarissa, that's a family business, so that's different. That they have a family unit running it, and they're very efficient because they're able to talk about things at home as well as work. So Sarissa, always well run there, and more importantly, Steve, as the director manager, always got his finger on the pulse of efficiencies and posting because of the work Steve had done in the past. With printing, that has to be an absolute mental job in the printing industry. And being efficient and making sure thousands of magazines are made at an hour. to get out the door to specific shops on time.
For sure. That's cool.
Yeah,
Is there something? You probably had a good idea of what you were stepping into at Footsore, and you had a good idea of the people that you're working with. But is there something that you've discovered that you didn't know, which is a nice surprise? When you go in and get closer and you get your nose in the door.
I don't know. They got some lovely models. Found some that I didn't know they had. Toy soldiers, isn't it? We're toy soldiers. Get distracted by the shiny. At this point, no, it's exactly what I was expecting. It's obviously in small business we've got to struggle a little bit with the pricing because things are changing so much, and this April is going to be a killer, as some of the staffing wage increases are forced on us, which you could argue isn't a bad thing, but actually for a small business it's almost crippling. So we're going to have to think very carefully how we go forwards with that, which part why I'm on board, to make sure those efficiencies are in place so we can afford to keep everybody on board and make sure that we're able to grow and thrive going forwards into the next few years. Well, so we've got plans in place for that.
Let's put a pin in that one, because I'd like to talk about Brexit and breaking away from the EU and maybe people that want to buy things in the US and other countries. But let's talk specifically about Footsore for a minute, because some people might have heard of the company and never really thought anything of it. Some people might not be aware of the games. So maybe take the Barons War. You mentioned that as an award-winning game, and I know that's one that's been really heavily backed over the last few years in terms of Kickstarters and rule books and different things like that, right? And it's always one that's tickled my fancy. So maybe talk about that and talk about some games that that people might have heard of but not really kind of dug too deep into, and maybe some reasons why people might have a look a little bit closer about some of the games that are offered by Footsore.
Okay, yeah. Well, Footsore's been around quite a while. But in its current guise, with Andy and Mark taking it on board about 9 years ago, it became what it is with the Barons War. Andy wrote a set of rules which is all about that sort of King John period, death and taxes, that type of stuff, Robin Hood. Very much a skirmish game, small numbers, looking at 30 figures a side, and fast play, very cinematic, and on a 3x3 table you've got plenty of terrain to hide around and maneuver. You can even get some knights in there and have your heraldry. Well, although they didn't really have a lot of heraldry at that point in time, the Barons War itself covers that sort of short period. But what Andy's been able to do with those rules is develop them so that they can be utilised for a much larger period. And we've got people going back as far as like the Conquest AD sort of 70 with the Romans, all the way up to the Crusades and 14 coming up to War of the Roses type period, I think. Although there's nothing that specifically covers that yet. So Andy's been working on that for years, and I had a helpful hand in playtesting, I hope to think. But that's the cornerstone, if you like, for Footsore and the range of knights that we have. We've just had 3 plastic sets added to that range with War Games Atlantic, a little partnership going there. And we've got new knights mounted and sergeants mounted coming over the next few months.
Nice.
That's quite exciting to work with War Games Atlantic as a partner there. Now, Andy is basically a separate entity in this case, writing the rules. He is under the pseudonym Warhost.
Okay.
And Warhost is the writing arm, if you like, that Andy uses. And that also produced Mortal Gods. And that's an awesome little skirmish game, and I particularly like it with the Mythic, with the Argonauts and a variety of Gorgons and what have you that are involved in that. My personal model favourite is the Hydra. That's a rather nice sculpt by Trish Carden, who you want to probably check out her Harrowhurst range.
Yeah, I'm going to come on to that. I was going to come on to that, but you mentioned it now, so let's talk about that, because it's really important to note that the people that are working with Footsore, you know, they're not any sort of Johnny-come-latelys. You know, the people that are working with, you kind of alluded.
Oh no, the monster
to it.
girl.
Yeah, you've alluded to it numerous times when you talk about how the industry is very small and compact, and people know each other. So yeah, Trish Carden is someone that's been sculpting for decades. I'd say 40 years.
From Marauder through Games Workshop to what she's doing now at her own little range called Harrowhurst, which we at Footsore are. You jump on our website, we've got a page dedicated to her stuff. That's where she sells. And we it's all resin. It's gorgeous little models of tree men or dragons and dryad type creatures. She loves quirkiness. She's got her reputation as the monster girl over the years. So I think that she got that name from working with Peter Jackson when she did the spider Shelob.
Mm-hmm. And it's just,
she's amazing.
Yeah, and just interesting models that you might want to use for, skirmish games where you acquire monsters, or D&D, or
also, any skirmish game.
Yeah, and just the trolls are awesome. I was looking over it just the other day as a kind of little bit of preparation before we talked, and just the trolls on there are really cool. And you mentioned like little quirky models. You know, there's all sorts of little things that really good. So yeah,
some lovely stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, she's Harrowhurst. I mean, we also, in the background, there's people that we work with which aren't on our website, like Old School Miniatures and Hayland Games and a variety of others, where we, like Grey for Now, where we produce the metal. So we'll actually produce the molds, we'll spin the molds, create the metal for them, so they can package it themselves and sell it themselves on their own websites. Mm-hmm. So we've got that service, which is a growing service as well, because as I said, I've got two very, very good two very good mold makers in both the resin and the silicon for the metal spin casting.
That's interesting. Let's dig around in that, because that was one thing that kind of blew me away when I visited Warlord and also visited Footsore. Was they had these huge racks of molds. You know, so just talk us through how a mold is made for metal casting, and how
if it's metal, it's interesting because we nowadays with 3D printing, which is a whole different topic, because I've got my own aircraft as well with Rockworks. But with 3D printing now, we get some master miniatures sent to us in a variety of materials. Not always a traditional green stuff sculpt or a bees putty sculpt on a wire frame. So we have to handle masters or originals, if you like, very carefully. And we've discovered that obviously the variety of things that people say, oh yes, it will work in the vulcanized model rubber mold, don't. They often melt or disintegrate. So the process basically is a master original is pressed into a soft silicon half of a mold. It's Paul, who is the master mold maker, will build the silicon around that model so it has a nice seam line. That gets powdered. Then the top half is put on top of it, and then it goes in a press under pressure for a period of time at a set temperature, and then you get this vulcanized rubber, nice and solid rubber silicon mold come out, which he splits in half. Hopefully the model's intact still, but quite often not. So the original is taken out, or the bits are taken out, and we should have a cavity of the original, which is perfectly replicated. And then once Paul's finished adding channels and air vent lines, we can then take that to the spin casting machine. Metal that sits at about 370 degrees Celsius is poured into a spinning mold. That metal's centrifugally forced out into the cavity, hopefully with no traps of air, because Paul would have put air vents in. And then from that, once it's cooled, that spin should give us a really nice, clean tin, which is what we use for the originals. And once we've spun that tin enough times to fill a new mold, probably 16 figures or so, 12 to 16, depending on the figure, we can then use those, clean them, make sure they're spot on, and then they get used in a production mold, which is exactly the same process of vulcanizing and then cutting and spinning. So there you go, quick breakdown of that. But the problem we've found is that the originals often disintegrate or don't press. So what we do with a lot of our master originals is put them through a silicon mold process in the resin department. So that's slightly different because it involves pressurizing and vacuuming of a two-part mold making material liquid. But our master mold maker there, Joel, sprues them up so he can pour them. He can make the original mold. He then cut that mold carefully to create the seam lines to allow him access into the model. Then he pours the resin once that's all done. And then we get a resin original, which is really high fidelity. Mm-hmm. And that can then go into the metal mold making process as a master.
Mm-hmm. It's an interesting,
it can
it's
be quite long-winded.
Yeah, it's an interesting world. And the actual kind of metal molds, they're probably, about 9 inches across, like a 9-inch across? 9
or 11. That's the standard sizes, the machines.
That was good guessing from me. And the big chunky boys, aren't they? Because you have these big racks. I kind of felt like going back in time to like maybe like the 60s or the 50s when they had movies on actual reels. It's kind of like that, isn't it? It's kind of like these.
It's very much like an old movie reels. Pull them off the tins off the shelf. They're about 1 inch wide, 9 inches across. So yeah, it'd be about that. Yeah,
and it's just interesting seeing that whole catalogue of just all the different
maintaining that catalogue is very interesting, especially if we inherit molds. Some companies come to us with their own molds that they've had made from a variety of companies, and they expect them to work straight away. But every mold maker over the decades has changed or tweaked or found their own methods, and then they've also made them to work on their machines.
Yeah.
And although the machine's not that different or dissimilar, there is a variety out there, and they all work differently.
Yeah, and again, you kind of when you just at the purchasing end of this, you don't necessarily realize the situation, but the casting machine is like a top-down washing machine. You know, washing machines in England, we kind of load them from the side. In America, there's a lot of washing machines that you still load from the top, but it's like a kind of drum that spins, and then you just
lift the lid.
Yeah, good. You talk us through that, actually, how it happens. You lift the lid, put the cast in, and then what?
So you put your 9-inch or 11-inch mold in. Good to know before you put it in what the cavities are like. Is it a horse or is it a banner? Because how you pour changes depending on what you're putting in the mold.
How talk to us about that, mate. Come on. So how would you pour differently from a banner to a horse?
Yeah, when you put it in the machine, you put your lock plate down on top, get the machine running, and what tends to happen is most machines will start spinning. They'll push and lock everything up to the lid, and you've got a hole in the lid, so the whole thing is spinning, and there's a hole which you can pour your molten metal down. So you use a ladle, and you basically pour the metal down through the hole into the rubber mold that's spinning below, and off it goes. But the difference between a horse and a banner, for example, is just sheer volume of metal. Mm-hmm. So if you think about how much is going into a small banner, and you might have one mold with 12 banners on it. Yeah. So you're literally just dropping in a small touch of metal and letting that spin. If it's a horse, then you're pouring maybe from a slightly higher height. You pour slightly slower. You pour a lot more in.
It's like an art. Is it an art or is it a science? Or is it both?
I think there's definitely a skill there. Definitely a skill that is easily learnt. Obviously, mastering it doesn't take too long if you're doing it day in, day out, but it is something that you have to pay attention to.
For sure. What you
don't want is a half-filled cavity where you have to try and peel half a horse out each time, because there's 12 horses and it can take you forever. If you've got a full spin with the core, if you like, the metal showing in the core, then all the sprues and the horses, all the models will stay on the sprue.
Yeah.
If you don't get the sprue fully out to the core, then you basically have to peel each one out individually, and it's a real pain. But luckily, it doesn't matter if you. It will matter if you overpour, because then you plug the hole and you can't get the mould off of the spin plate. So you do have to balance that. But if you've got a good sprue, which is essentially the lump of metal that forms a ring when it cools from the centrifugal force, and off of that has the arms which go out to the model, and then the model on the end of them. If you've done it right, you should be able to open the two halves of the mould carefully, allow the rubber to pop off the models, not just rip it off. And then you've got all your models attached to this circular frame, which is great, because then you can check the models easily. You can pop them off easily into a bucket for their code, and the remaining bits are recycled straight back into the hot pots.
Is it
melt again?
Is everything that could ever be known about metal casting known? Is there any innovation left within metal casting, or is it just perfected?
I'm sure that someone might think of something, but it's a traditional art, and it's been used for many, many eons. I'm sure. I don't know when the first one was made, to be honest, but I know it works, and it's worked for decades. And yeah, I've even seen. My dad's got moulds for musket balls, so it's a bit like melting down the old lead toy soldiers and turning them into a musket ball. It's not dissimilar. So
where's the industry going in terms of innovation? Making?
Oh God. Well, there's been obviously over the last certainly since COVID, really emphasised it. A blast into 3D and 3D sculptors. It seems like everybody picked up ZBrush or Blender, and they can all make models, and they're brilliant. Well, not all of them.
On a screen.
On a screen, absolutely. The problem where we in the those of us in the industry that have been here a long time already know that it's not a miracle thing that's going to take over everything. We're not worried about it, because it's something to be aware of, and it's something that we can utilize and make use of if we're clever, hopefully at some point. But a lot of the sculptors don't understand how to actually. They're an artist. They're not business people. They don't necessarily know the way to promote themselves or present their product to actually make their money. So they completely undervalue their time and skill. And that keeps the prices super low for an end consumer who can buy an STL potentially for pennies or only a few pounds, which is great for them if they've got their own 3D printer and they can manage to make that work. And most of them do make very good quality figures which will work on a 3D print. But to actually make 3D work profitably is extremely difficult and time consuming and material consuming, because none of it can be recycled. As I've obviously discovered, I've been doing aircraft for 6 years, and to get them sprued up right, to get them working efficiently, you have to build in potentially a 30% add-on for waste material, on top of 100% increase of waste material. Let me explain that just quickly. If I take a model, I've got all the resin in a 3D print off a resin printer. to all the sprues and the bits that hold it onto the print bed as it goes up and down.
Mm-hmm.
All of that sprue material can't be recycled, so it has to go into the weight and volume costing of that actual model.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of people, I'd say 90% of people selling physical prints don't do that. So they aren't actually acceptable, and they realise that after they go bust, or they have to add VAT because they're starting to have to pay that, or things like that. So you have to include that, and then on top of that, so that's where that 100% extra comes in, because often it's about the same weight as a model. But then on top of that, you've got the failures, and there's generally going to be 25 to 30% failure on models coming off your machine. Mm-hmm. And that could be one complete bed that doesn't work for some reason. Your lights, a light's failed or something. Or the FEP was too loose, or it could be any number of things.
The time it takes to print a model must be taken into consideration also. The time it takes for it to print.
To a degree. I use screen time on that in that equation, because obviously my printer screen's only going to last so many hours, maybe 3, 4, maybe 1,000 hours, but you've got to divide your time into your model cost per print. But it's not your personal time. Your personal time that you account for is the time that you spend spruing it, laying it up. I call it sprue, supporting.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Your time supporting it could be half an hour, maybe more per model. You've got to include that in the price. You've got to turning the machine on, filling it, maintaining it, cleaning the model afterwards, making sure it's sellable if you're going to be selling it. All of that has to be costed into a model as well. And I think there's some equations out there that people have used. Some are okay, some have most of it. But I think people would be shocked if they actually tried to start a business properly and run the costings. They'll be making pennies out of a sculpt if it's a sculpt they've had to buy from someone else. If it's one they've had to make themselves, say one of the many artists out there, I'm sure they could do it, but if they were to include their sculpt time in the cost, then they'd be shocked and be selling things a lot higher.
It all comes back to, I guess, a value proposition. I talk about, it sounds very fancy, but I talk about a value proposition in pretty much everything. A simple value proposition is that I don't eat bread-based cakes because it's not a good value proposition. The positive I get from that, with the amount of money I have to pay for the cake and also the calories, I don't do it. And another one is that we now have a cleaner, and I was very, very uneasy with having a cleaner when we first got one. I thought, it's lazy, we should clean our own house, but the cleaners in this country are very, very cheap, and so it's the equivalent of about £20 for 3 hours of cleaning each week. And so I think I'm gaining 3 hours of leisure time and it's costing me £20. That's a good value proposition. So bread-based cake, not a good value proposition. Having a cleaner in my current location, that is a good value proposition. So it kind of links back to what I've been saying to you about all this hard-won experience. You're bringing that to bear in your job, and you're bringing that to bear with the time that you're spending thinking about these things, and you are saving people a whole bunch of time. You are giving people. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, and it links into what we were saying a little bit earlier about the industry being almost incestuous, where everybody knows each other. Let's take Graham at Grey for Now Games. A good friend of mine. Again, I worked with him at Warlord. He's an ex-GW guy as well. He did White Dwarf for many years. He is an artist. He can do graphic bits. He can do layouts on books. He was social media, etc. But what he did during lockdown was teach himself Blender and become an actual sculptor as well. And he's very, very good. I hate him. I love him too. He's one of those guys who can do all those types of skills. He went down that generalist route with the creativity side of things. Uh-huh. And he's brilliant. But Grafenau Games was Test of Honor.
Mm-hmm.
Test of Honor being with Andy Hobday and Graham, whilst they were working at Warlord. They obviously owned Test of Honor whilst they were there. And Footsore now make the metal for Graham for Test of Honor. So Graham himself, a few years ago, whilst I was working at Sarissa, I talked to him about it, and he was struggling to fulfill client orders, customer orders. So he was trying to design a game or extras for Test of Honor. He was trying to sculpt extra models for Test of Honor, design cards, design rules, all those bits. What he was finding was he didn't have time to do any of that because he had to get the models packed, sorted into boxes, out to customers, which was a great problem to have because he was obviously selling lots.
Yeah.
So this is where Steve and I, we got things running at Sarissa, where we took all of Graham's metal. So Footsore would fulfill the metal order and send it to Sarissa instead of Graham. Sarissa would package it, put it together on the shelf so it was product. And then when orders came in, they were linked into Graham's system and they could see the orders and pick, pack and dispatch them every day, which then freed Graham totally to do what he wanted, which was to design games. So within the year, 0200 hours actually became real. And literally, just now, he's doing Guards of Traitor's Toll. So Grafenau Games now has 3 core game systems, which branched out from Test of Honor into a night raid scenarios in World War II, which is 0200 hours, and now a fantasy adventure / D&D co-op game / fighty game skirmish. It's kind of in between D&D and an actual skirmish, with Guards of Traitor's Toll, which has got some fantastic looking miniatures which he's designed with some other sculptors that he's got on board, freelance, and they are even plastics from War Games Atlantic. So again, working with other people means that if you think outside the box, sometimes a small company that is a one-man band, as in Graham, can actually create the time for himself by allowing others to do some of the other work. Yes, it costs him because he has to pay Sarissa to do the pick, pack and dispatch and even the packaging of the sets. But what he's done is actually got that cleaner in to do all the work and freed up 3 hours of his time to do that game that he loves doing, and the design and the sculpting. So Graham's got to grips with it over the last couple of years, and I think it was a wrench for him to do that because it was his company, his Test of Honor, his Grafenau, and to hand it out to other people to do is nervous. It's nerve-wracking even. I know that. It's a tough thing to do, to trust and rely on them for quality and service. But by doing that, he's able to come out with 2 new games on top of Test of Honor and support Test of Honor.
And he probably enjoys that more than picking and packing stuff, right?
Oh, yes, immensely. He hated picking and packing. I know that. But we at Sarissa, it meant that we had the capacity. We were shipping a lot of products to the same sort of people. Test of Honor was one of the major ranges for MDF buildings, as that Sarissa had developed. So that partnership was already there, and that trust had been built there. So that enabled Graham to say, yep, he knew me, so he knew it would be in my hands. I could look after it, and Sarissa would grow with it and support them. And that Sarissa are doing that for other companies as well, from Flags of War to War Games Atlantic and others. So within the industry, in the background, some of these companies are doing more than one thing. Sarissa is an MDF manufacturer of superb kits, very, very well built kits that are great starting point for a newbie or for experienced people to do work on. But in the background that you don't see is they also service 4 or 5 companies now with their distribution, and that helps everybody because Sarissa have got access to volume of mail, so their mail is cheaper, so they don't have to charge. A company like Graham on his own would be paying full price for shipping, and that's a killer in some parts of the world. Getting out to the US when the US postal office put all their prices up by double overnight. Graham wouldn't have coped on his own, whereas Sarissa's got the volume going out. That enables them to keep prices at a competitive rate, and that means that as a customer end user, you're getting a good customer service. Your post is shipped at a good postal rate and not at the proper charges that it might have to be if it was a smaller company.
It's interesting. I could listen to your day about it, mate. I could talk to you all day about it, but our hour has kind of rattled by. So as we kind of begin to round up, what's the kind of near future holding for Footsore?
Obviously, I'm just getting to grips with Footsore. So, we've got Mortal Gods. We are working hard on that in the background. People, obviously, I say we, the Royal We, they are making George and others work on that hard in the background. There are some fantastic guys supporting it out in the community. Tactica group over in Germany went to Tactica recently and showed off Troy, which is their expansion to it, and we're talking to them because I think it's a fab idea. Watch this space a little bit for Mortal Gods as we progress it a little bit further. In the meantime, Gangs of Rome, we've got lots going on there. Daz, whose original brainchild, an idea concept created it, has got loads of ideas to take us into other parts of the world other than Rome itself. So that could be exciting. And I think there's some other people out there playing about with scenarios and ideas, which are intriguing. Let's say that for now. Baron's War is really exciting. So I could probably tell everybody now that this June or so is when I'd like to shout out about Outremer, going overseas, i.e. the Crusades, and taking us into a bit more, a few more models from Paul Hicks.
Awesome.
Let's say that for now. So I'm looking at a Kickstarter and we'll chat about it a bit more and get people's ideas and interest on that. So Outremer is one part of Baron's War. Another part is called The Conquest, and we've got a new Facebook group just for The Conquest, Baron's War Conquest. And we'd like people to jump on that if they're interested in anything from about 350 AD through to 1190.
Nice.
Anarchy is kind of in between that and the Baron's War itself in date terms. That'll come later, but we're definitely looking at that. We've got some interesting characters made already. We're getting those painted at the moment, so lots of action going on there. And Conquest itself will probably have an opportunity to have extra armies like the Irish and what have you. We've already got the Welsh, but we'll do the Irish soon. That's been confirmed. And more is what I'm after there with Baron's War, because the game itself, the Baron's War, is such a good set of rules in our opinion, that allow easy access for anybody who's interested in those sort of periods with knights. Allows them to get on the tabletop with a small skirmish force which can expand into bigger battles, and we'll take it further back with Conquest, but also forwards a bit as well. And Andy himself has also brought out War Host, which is the fantasy version. If you look out for hobdayandhicks.com, their little website, that's a joint venture between Paul Hicks and Andy Hobday, and a fancy range of very, very nice looking orcs and elves. And the orcs are very, I think, traditional. They're like a bit more envisaged like Tolkien might like.
Woo, mate, that's awesome.
Doing all of that,
so much going on. But
that's all. The strings.
Yeah, for sure. That's all the time we got, unfortunately, mate. It's a good catch up. And one thing I always like about doing the show is that it just gives you the opportunity to have a little bit of a chinwag that you probably would just have over a pint or a cup of tea anyway, but you get to record it and other people get to listen to it too. So thank you for your time, Rich. We didn't even get a chance to talk about your hobby setup at home. I wanted to talk about that, but maybe you can come on again soon.
Just as well, I haven't got one at the moment.
Yeah, well, I know.
House is a building site.
Yeah, you just moved house, right? Because I think I'd spoken to you and you just kind of got a hobby set up at home and then you've moved house. So, you can come back on and you can talk to us about your aspirations for a hobby setup as you move forward.
Oh, yes, that would be awesome. Yeah, I've got some great ideas for that. But no, that's for next time.
All right, well, thanks a lot for your time, mate. We really appreciate it and I'll speak to you again soon.
Perfect. Take care, guys.
There you go, episode 212 all wrapped up there. Yeah, you can tell, you can see, you can hear how nice a chap Rich is, can't you? He's just a genuinely nice guy, and he's a sort of kindly, brotherly figure, unclely figure, bloke from next door. Your fridge is on the blink, your milk's gonna go off, and you say, Rich, can I put my milk in your fridge so it doesn't go off? Because until the guy comes around this afternoon and fixes it. And he'd say, yes, that's no problem. So yeah, awesome. Thanks a lot for Rich for coming back onto the show, and thanks for being a big supporter of just hobby groups and hobby people and people trying to do some good stuff. He's such a nice chap. Post ramblage. What we on? Nothing really exciting. Went on a course this weekend away in Hong Kong, so I didn't really get much hobby done over the weekend. But I'm currently painting characters for the Baratheons from A Song of Ice and Fire. You'll be delighted to hear that I'm still doubling down on my my fanboy addiction with A Song of Ice and Fire. So yeah, I'm painting 2 of the hero boxes for Baratheon. So who am I painting? If you're into A Song of Ice and Fire, you'll know Olenna Tyrell, the old lady from the Tyrells. Melisandre, the red lady who likes Rollo and like the fire god guy. Marjorie Tyrell, the strumpet, painting her, and a bunch of other guys, grizzled oldie guys. So hopefully get those finished over the weekend so I can start painting up some units again. I've got some Kingsmen and some Queensmen. They are on the painting table. They should be pretty easy to paint up because there's a lot of them is just metal, so I can do that. I've got a pretty okay system with painting like plate armor going, which is quite nice. It's not maybe the most amazing enter competitions and win, but it's pretty solid. If you're interested in that, let me know and I'll let you know. But that's pretty much it in terms of stuff that's going on. I wanted to give a shout out to the people that are in the background and paint all the minis that are kind of slowly Avengers assembly type kind of thing going on in the background. There's Mr. Brian Cook from Australia who is helping us with a few different things. There's Mr. Patch Adams also from Australia who is putting together some articles for our upcoming website. There's also Mr. Dave Xavier from also from Australia. There's a bit of a theme going on, and he has decided to come on board and help us out with a few different things. I'm going to leave it there. I'm going to slowly give shout outs to people over the course of the next few post rambles. But Brian and Patch and Dave are all doing really great work, just kind of cheerleading in the background and starting a little bit like War of the Worlds, a little bit like the start of War of the Worlds. You know, you won't feel any of these things right now, but we are watching from afar and we are slowly drawing plans, and hopefully we're not going to get infected by microbes and die when we eventually unveil these plans and things. But yeah, we're slowly drawing plans. That's good, that, innit? I think I remember when War of the Worlds, I don't remember when War of the Worlds first, the audio, it was like an audio at first. I remember this is from my dad because I don't actually remember because I wasn't born at the time. I was just a naughty milkman's thought at the time. But I think War of the Worlds was obviously a book, but then they did an adaptation for like UK radio. Please correct me if I'm wrong, and please embellish my telling with actual facts and dates. but I believe that it was obviously a book, and then they turned it into like a radio adaptation. I think they played it, and I think there was like a big uproar because people were listening to it like it was actually happening. But like the audio version of War of the Worlds that was released in England on radio was like a classic, and there's a few decent songs on there as well that are still pretty decent now. But so like War of the Worlds-esque. There you go. But anyway, so we're putting stuff together in the background. We've got a lot of long-sighted and macro plans and ideas which should hopefully slowly and steadily come to fruition. Make sure you reach out to us and let us know what you enjoy. You'll be able to check out, I think when this goes live, you'll be able to check out the Paint All the Minis website, Paint All the Minis at paintalltheminis.co.uk, and you'll be able to check out Brian's amazing paint tutorials. You'll be able to check out different articles from Patch and from Dave that have already been put up, and hopefully be able to see more in the future. But yeah, we want to connect with more people. So I think I mentioned it in the last post ramble. If you are interested in providing content, stuff that just kind of falls out of you anyway, we can put a little Paint All the Minis branded bucket underneath it, so when it falls out of you, we can scoop it up, we can capture it, and we can we can kind of throw that on the website. That's a very potentially disgusting metaphor there. But if there's anything that's artistic that's going to fall out of you, let us know, and we can capture it in the Paint All the Minis pail. And then we can throw that out of the window onto the wall that is the Paint All the Minis website. But anyway, that's enough of the post-ramble. Until next time we're together, keep painting.